my name is Jordyn, and I'm going to share about my pregnancy that went terribly wrong in every way possible, but turned around to make the greatest story of my life. After finding out that we were expecting our third child, we were beyond excited. This was our first planned pregnancy, so we were over the moon. We told our daughters and families extremely early on because we couldn't contain our excitement. But at only 6 weeks along, I started to bleed. Being so early in my pregnancy, I knew exactly what that meant. I was miscarrying. I was beyond devastated, and after reading the statistics of how many women go through miscarriages, I'm sure a lot of you know that pain. Not wanting to accept that that's what it was, I decided to go to the ER, and after 8 hours of crying and waiting in the waiting room, I was finally brought back for an ultrasound. And to my surprise, there was a heartbeat. The doctor said that the heartbeat was very strong for being so early, so my chances of miscarrying were actually pretty low. And the blood was from a subchorionic hemorrhage, which is a collection of blood formed between the uterine wall and the chorion. They told me it's fairly common in pregnancies and that my body would absorb the clot and I would go on to have a healthy pregnancy. I was thrilled at this news and couldn't wait to call my family and tell them that everything was okay. But unfortunately, through the weeks, my bleeding only got heavier. I went back to the ER and they told me that I now had 2 hemorrhages and they were growing in size. I didn't know what this meant for my pregnancy, so I made an appointment with my doctor, and after another ultrasound, he said that they were very large and near my cervix, so I was high risk of going into preterm labor. At this point, I was 10 weeks pregnant and decided to put myself on bed rest. I wasn't going to risk throwing myself into labor. At about 15 weeks along, I woke up in the middle of the night with sudden cramps. I ran to the bathroom and felt a big gush of fluid. It crossed my mind that my water may have broken, but I quickly shook off that thought because I was still so early in my pregnancy, and I didn't think that was possible. For some reason, I went back to bed, and I waited until the next day to go see the doctor, and at that ultrasound, my worst fear was confirmed. My water had, in fact, broken. I waited for my doctor to come in, and he walked in with a look of pity. He told me my hemorrhage must have irritated my membranes and caused them to rupture. He told me he had never had a patient's water break this early, so he didn't know what to tell me, but he was certain my baby wouldn't make it. I would either go into labor or develop an infection. I went to see a high-risk specialist, and the doctor highly recommended that I induce my pregnancy, induce labor, which would ultimately end the life of my unborn child. She told me that it wasn't a matter of if I would develop the deadly choreo infection, but when. She explained to me that this pregnancy was no longer viable, and the baby's lungs hadn't even started developing yet, and without amniotic fluid, it was not possible for them to develop. At one point, one of the high-risk doctors said, "Why not just end this one and start over with a healthy pregnancy?" My mouth dropped open, and I asked him if he saw the same heartbeat that I saw. I said, "I feel this baby kick with his or her developed little legs and feet. How could I end his or her life?" He told me he didn't mean to upset me, but once again, this pregnancy was no longer viable, and at this point of my pregnancy, my life was in danger. I left furious and in tears. I went through an array of emotions. I couldn't morally end this baby's life and live with myself, but was I doing him or her an injustice by allowing him or her to suffer? At this point was when I heavily turned to prayer and to God. I begged him to take this burden of a decision off of me and for him to make the ultimate decision. I couldn't morally have blood on my hands and live with myself. And I loved this baby so much. I begged God to take this baby if he or she was going to suffer. I felt an indescribable peace when I took that choice that I see so many women fighting for off the table. I resented having that choice. It brought me an immense amount of anxiety. I had wished abortion had never even been an option. But undoubtedly, I understand how someone might not feel that same peace if they don't know the same God I know. Putting this choice in his hands was the only thing that got me through the weeks to come. Word got around of mine and Colton's pregnancy, and people in the churches started coming around and bringing me food every night and praying and helping me provide for my family. It was truly amazing, and I will never be able to thank them or repay them enough. I made it at this point 5 weeks with ruptured membranes. I was 20 weeks pregnant, and I remember waking up one night extremely lightheaded. I ran to the bathroom, and the next thing I remember was waking up in Colton's arms. He was begging me to wake up, and when I finally came to, I realized I had passed out and began to bleed quite a bit. We rushed to labor and delivery, and at this point, I was soaking through towels and began to receive blood transfusions. While getting started on those, they did a quick ultrasound to see that my baby's heart rate was still strong and completely normal. They were all shocked, but despite his normal heart rate, the high-risk doctor came in and told me we needed to induce labor. I told him he was crazy and they would do no such thing. He told me I was losing a dangerous amount of blood and I needed to think about my other 2 children who needed their mother. I told him I felt fine and the blood transfusions were doing their magic. And if I started to fade away, that he could induce labor. But while I was feeling fine and the rest of my vitals were stable, that they wouldn't touch me. He threw his hands up in the air and he said, I honestly don't understand your decision, but okay. After 4 days of being in the hospital, I was finally released and immediately sent to my doctor for an ultrasound. At this ultrasound, I was given the devastating news that my baby had severe bowel obstruction. He also had fluid around his heart, which was another indication of stress. The doctor told me she hated to give up all hope, but at this point, he had a 0% chance of survival. She said not only would he not have developed lungs, but now he needed surgery, and this baby would never withstand that. I went home again in tears. After chatting with a friend whose baby was ironically in Kansas City having surgery on her bowels due to a gastro condition she was born with, I decided that my baby would be better hands up there. And I called my high-risk doctor and asked to be transferred. She said, okay, and sent the referral. A few days before that first appointment in Kansas City, I found myself keeled over in the bathroom in an intense amount of pain and heavily bleeding once again. We rushed to labor and delivery in Springfield, and they thought I might be experiencing placenta abruption, but couldn't confirm it due to lack of amniotic fluid in the ultrasound. We all decided it was best I made the trip to Kansas City that night, since I was only 2 days away from viability, and if my baby had any chance at living, his best chances were up there. Before I left, about 10 labor and delivery nurses gathered around my room and laid hands on me and prayed over me. It was the most incredible moment I had experienced yet, and I was so thankful for those amazing nurses. After a long goodbye to my sweet girls, not knowing how long it would be until I seen them again, my husband and I made the long trip to Kansas City. I was so excited to get a whole new perspective from a different group of doctors. But that excitement soon ended when the doctors didn't have any more hope than the Springfield doctors. I was told that I still had a 0% chance, my baby had a 0% chance of survival, and they had yet to see a successful story. I was devastated as Kansas City was my last hope. Every week, the NICU team would make their way into my room and give me that week's update of plan of action if I were to go into labor. One doctor said, so I think the most humane thing to do would be for me to lay your baby on your chest and spend those last moments together. I said, absolutely not. You will do what you can to save my baby. And she said, there's no chance of survival, and trying to save him would only cause him misery and discomfort. I told her we were believing in a miracle, and she said, sometimes God's miracles are for you to hold your baby for 20 minutes, and that's it. Well, that may be true, but my son was still alive with a healthy beating heart, and she was talking about him like we had already lost him. I told her to please leave and to not come back. Another doctor informed me that it didn't matter how far along I got. The chances were still at 0 due to lack of fluid. She told me if for some miracle chance my baby makes it, he would be severely disabled and would need to be trached for the rest of his life. As devastating as that was to hear, none of those things would have made us love our baby any less. Still fighting for our son's life, I began demanding my miracle. I started reading through the New Testament, and there is a reason Jesus performed these tremendous miracles in his life. I knew he was capable, And every night, we would lay hands on my stomach and pray that God himself would breathe life into our baby's lungs and make him strong enough to withstand surgery, and that he would protect me from infection until it was safe enough for him to be delivered. I begged God for a sign that he would be okay. A few days later, one Sunday morning, I was listening to a church online. This cleaning lady came in and hung around for a while and said, "I'm sorry, I'm just hanging around. I'm trying to listen to your pastor because that man speaks truth." I laughed and said, "Well, you should stay a while and listen to the sermon with me." We chatted a little bit, but I didn't tell her my whole story or my situation. After she left, she came running back about a minute later and said, "Hey, I just had to come back because God was nudging at me to tell you something. He wanted me to tell you that your baby is going to be just fine." I instantly began to cry and said, "You have no idea what you've just done for me." She came and gave me a hug, and off she went. And I never saw her again, but that was the sign that I had prayed for, and I am no longer worried. The morning of November 27th, 2020, at 27 weeks gestation, I became very ill. The infection had set in. Doctors came swarming in to deliver my baby via emergency C-section. 30 minutes later, my son, Colton Ellis Jones, was born. He was rushed to Children's Mercy and had a very rough start at life. And we most definitely almost lost him, but with our amazing God, who had his hand on an incredible team of doctors who didn't give up on him, he made it. We spent the next 6 months in the NICU with enduring many surgeries, and I won't get into all of that, but it is an even more incredible story, and I hope I can share that with you guys someday. But that would take up the whole service. Ellis is almost 4 now. He is sitting right there with my husband. Wanna come up here? Hi. And he is as wild as ever. He's a T-Rex half the time, a buck and bull the other half of the time. He has no developmental issues. He has no other issues. He is just happy and healthy. And if I had listened to the doctors, I would have aborted one of the biggest blessings of my life. So that's my story. Thanks for listening.